now that we've figured out a way to kind of plot out chord voicings using this approach of breaking the guitar into 3 different sections, let's apply this to a walking bass line and chord comping style. This is a signature style of playing solo jazz guitar and fingerstyle jazz guitar. You can use it in a solo guitar situation, but also if you're accompanying a melodic instrument, such as a singer, vocalist, a trumpet player, a horn player. Any situation you're playing duo, or even in a trio situation where there's no bass player, no worries, you can cover that low ground now. You can get the low in there and use this and create a very full, complete way of accompanying somebody on a jazz standard. So we've taken a look at the guide tone approach to outline and engineer our chord voicings. Let's take a quick look at the technique behind this. Generally speaking, your thumb is going to be used to play the single note bass lines, the walking 4 bass lines, and the fingers of your right hand, index, middle, and sometimes the ring finger and or pinky will be used to play the guide tone voicings in the middle string register. And just initially, the technique is to be able to play both at the same time. So, for example, a chord and a bass together, and then the chord on the and of the note, so after the bass, and having those parts be independent from one another. I have another course available on TrueFire that really digs deep into this concept. There's a whole course devoted to walking bass lines and calming that you may want to check out if you're interested in this. But for now, let's just get started with some of the examples that you have on your PDFs. The first example walks you through a 2-5-1 and then a 6 progression leading back to the 2 that you can loop just using a single walking 4 bass line, meaning a walking bass line on the quarter notes every beat of the 4/4 bar here, and putting these guide tone shapes on top of the chords. So what you might want to do as a little preparatory exercise is just look at this first chord here, D minor 7, that's the 2 chord. Our guide tone shape will be this, same shape that we learned in the last 2 lessons. And to get the technique of the right hand happening, you might want to just get this quarter note happening with the bass, and then drop in the chords both on the beat and then off the beat. 1 2 3 4 1 and 2 3 4. So now you're keeping those parts independent from one another, and you're able to check out the syncopation. So let's look at this example. A 1, a 2, a 1 2 3 and in the next example, we're going to take the exact same pattern, same walking bass line and same chord progression, but we're going to add one additional note, an extension, in this case on the B string, for a couple of reasons. We're going to keep the extension on the B string. Number one, it's easier to play with the right hand because now your ring finger on the right hand can just pluck the B string fairly easily. It's just already poised to grab that. And then musically it'll also work because by keeping the extensions on the same string, there's not a lot of movement around. There's not this movement from low to high, and it's all going to be keeping with our tradition of voice leading here. So you can voice lead the extensions in the same way that you can voice lead the guide tones. So now let's take a look at the second example on your handout. We're just elaborating on the first example by adding one extension with every chord voicing. Here we go, a little slower. A 1 2 3 and if we were to take the same chord progression and start out on another string set, there's 2 inversions for all of these guide tones. And so in the previous 2 examples we just played through, the D minor started on a root 5, but we can do the same thing starting with a root 6 D minor. It will take you into some different places, but I think starting, playing through these initial 2-5-1 progressions and then ultimately through an entire song, an entire standard, you want to practice in both regions, starting out on root 5 and voice leading from there, and then starting out on root 6, because then that will acclimate you to pretty much the entire fretboard. Everything that you need to grab in a real-time situation will be available using one of those root 5 or root 6 voicings. So let's just illustrate a simple walking bass line with a 2-note guide tone structure, same chord progression, but now starting with a root 6 D minor 7 voicing. Here we go. This is the third example on the sheet here. 1, 2, 3, and... And then, like we did before, if we were to expand on that, adding one note on the B string as an extension or a fundamental chord tone, it would sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, and... Now, by adding a note on the B string, we can get some really colorful extensions to create some movement, even in the context of one chord. So, for example, in the second measure, we start off with a G9 chord, and then we can alter that to a G7 sharp 9 before it resolves to the C major 13. So you now, even though you're sticking with the same chord as the same G7 chord, you can create some really nice color on top by moving these extensions around. And because you know that that's the 9, you have control over altering it. You could also make it a flat 9 to C. But in this example, we're starting with a G9, we're raising the 9th, and then voice leading that to the C major 13.